These recorded sermons were made on weekdays with an attempt to simulate the original sermon. They were not made on Shabbat or Jewish holidays. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Moedim l'simcha. So first I'd like to acknowledge that Kiddush, our kosher for Pesach Kiddush, is sponsored by Ellen and Sharon Geller in commemoration of the yahrzeit of their father, Jack Geller, whose yahrzeit is today, and of their uncle, William Potler, whose yahrzeit was yesterday. May their memories be a blessing. So Larry Flint, the pornography king, once made a reference, I read it this years ago, once made a reference to the book we read today, Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, written by King Solomon, claiming as a defense that a book of the Bible, the Holy Bible, has pornographic references, and therefore it legitimizes it. And this is something that's very uncomfortable for Jews. The rabbis of the Talmud actually wrote that they did not want to include Song of Songs in the Tanakh, and there were many books written by prophets that were not included in the Torah, in the Old Testament as the Christians call it. Yet they felt that despite the fact that people might misinterpret Shir HaShirim for something more lowly and not as holy as it is, they still felt it was worth it, and they called the Song of Songs Kadosh Kadashim, the Holy of Holies. If all the other books are Kadosh, all the books are holy, this is the Holy of Holies, which is very hard to understand, but it's understandable that if they felt this way, to include it, despite the fact that it might be misinterpreted, because it's such a high level of holiness. And this is something that's very hard to understand, given their reluctance, and very hard to understand how to interpret it. The Art Scroll doesn't even translate the Shir HaShirim in their siddur verbatim. Rather, they just give the allegorical explanations. And the Mormon Church and other Christian groups have, in a sense, condemned or at least ignored this book as not holy, because it's just very strange, very hard to understand what exactly the person is saying. King Solomon is trying to get across. And I think the reason for this is that there's a vast difference, there's a fundamental difference upon the way Christians and Jews look at the physical universe in general, at sexuality in general. The Christians look at it as something dirty, something base, something that is not holy, is the opposite of holiness. And the Jews look at the physical universe, and specifically at sexuality, something that is very holy. And that needs explanation. What exactly does that mean, that it's holy? We certainly see the opposite point of view, the Christian point of view. How do we understand this as Jews? There's a reference to this in the Haggadah as well. If you look in the Haggadah Shel Pesach, there's a reference to this type of approach to the relationship between God and the Jewish people, and it gives an analogy. It says that it quotes the prophet Yechezkel, that when the Jewish people were led out of Egypt, they were like a young girl. Right? It says, "Rivava kitsemach hasadeh netatich, v'tarbi v'tigdeli v'tavoi ba'adi adayim shadayim lachon v'sarich tzimech v'at arom ve'erio." It describes a young girl who's naked and is pubescent, and God comes along and saves this young girl, this young maiden, who is representative of the Jewish people. But when you read it, it's just hard to understand what exactly the analogy is and why it has to sound so creepy. I mean, it's not exactly something we would expect. But I think this is something the sages are trying to get across, that despite the fact that it's something that we wouldn't expect, that will engage us. Like I always say, this is what Pesach is all about. It's about asking questions, about seeing things, the Torah presenting things in a way that is not predictable, in a way that causes us to think deeper and to question. Indeed, the concept of holiness in Torah, and something we said many times, must include the physical. The physical is an inevitable aspect of holiness that cannot be denied. It cannot be ignored. And without the physical, one can never attain holiness. And I think this is the fundamental difference between Judaism and Christianity. That Christianity looks at, as I said, the physical universe and the physical aspects of life as evil. And true spirituality is separating from the physical. Whereas Torah looks at Kedusha, as holiness, as the physical aspect of holiness to be inevitable and irreplaceable. And part of the reason why this is the fact, this is true, is because without an analogy, without a metaphor, without a physical, specifically a physical analogy, physical metaphor, we cannot understand how to relate to God directly. Because God is incomprehensible to us. God is infinite. God is not physical in any sense of the word. So how do I relate to a God that basically has nothing in common with me? And the answer is that we are able to relate to God and attain holiness only because we have a physical universe. Because the physical universe enables us to understand what a relationship is. So I say to myself, wow, just like I love my mother and father, or just like I love my cousins, my brothers and sisters, my children, I also love God. But without that analogy, without that metaphor, I can't understand what it is to relate to God. And therefore, holiness spirituality requires the physical universe. And this is what the Sefer HaChinuch teaches us, that love is the highest level of pleasure that there is in this world. And specifically love of God. And everyone could relate to this concept. If you tell them, love is very pleasurable, everyone knows that. When I love my boyfriend, my girlfriend, my wife, my husband, my parents, my children, etc. I love people. It enables me in a physical manner, specifically in a physical manner, and relating to physicality, I then understand in a very deep way what it means to love and can apply that to God. And I think this relates very much to Pesach on many, many levels. But if you look at the Rambam in Hilchot Shuvah, he says something unbelievable. He basically connects Abraham, who is, the Zohar tells us, is the forefather of Passover, the holiday of Passover. Talmud says it as well. And to Shir Hashirim and to this concept of love and the concept of specifically a sexual love and a love between a man and a woman. And this is what he says in Hilchot Shuvah, Perek Yud, Halacha Daled. He said, Ma'ila Zu, talking about the attribute of loving God, serving God out of love. He says, Hi ma'ala gedola amo. This is a tremendous, tremendous attribute. Ve'ein kol chacham zochela. Not every wise person merits this level. Ve'hi ma'ala to Avraham Avinu. This is the attribute, the positive attribute that Abraham had. Shekira'o hakadosh baruch hu ohavo. Because God called Abraham his lover. Lefish lo avad elam yava. Because he only served God out of love. This is the commandment that God gave us through Moses. This is like we say in Kriyat Shema, that you should love God with all your heart, your soul, and your money, and your resources. Once you love God this way, in a proper fashion, you'll immediately do all the mitzvot, all the commandments out of love. The Rambam continues, what is a proper way of love? You should love God with the tremendous love. It's very strong. Until your soul is connected, is bound with love of God. You're always thinking about it. Those who are lovesick. You hear this? He compares it to people who are lovesick. That someone's obsessed with a woman, and you don't think about anybody else except that woman. When you're sleeping, when you get up, when you eat and drink. And even more than this, even more than a love for a woman, he says, and this is obviously talking to men, one should love God. You should always be involved in it, thinking about it. With all your heart, with all your soul. This is what King Solomon said as an analogy. I'm lovesick. The entire Song of Songs, the book of Song of Songs, is a reference to this concept. Amazing Rambam, and very relevant for Passover. That just like Abraham is the forefather of Passover, teaches us the concept of loving God, and the way we love God is through an analogy of the physical universe. Understanding what love means to humans will teach us how to love God. This is what the holiday Passover is all about. Pesach is about the connection between the Jewish people and God, appreciating what God did for us in Mitzrayim, which is not just let us free, but He also gave us an opportunity to live in this world in such a way that we could utilize the universe, the physical universe, to connect to God in a very simple manner because of the fact that we have that analogy. And this is something that the world cannot understand unless it's taken seriously by the members of the individuals involved in the relationship. Because when individuals are involved in a relationship, it's very, very personal. And it's something that others can't understand, can't relate to. And we take that analogy and apply it to God as well. And this is what the Gemara tells us in Maseches Gittin, that the two cherubim statuettes that flanked the Aron Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodeshim, the Holy of Holies, right? The holiest place. What did you have there? You had two teenage kids, a teenage girl, a teenage boy, and whenever the Jewish people and God got along, they faced each other. And when they didn't get along, they turned away from each other. Because the love between God and the Jewish people had this analogy, this metaphor of two children who were basically dating each other and loved each other. And when they were hurt, they turned away from each other. So when the temple was destroyed and the Holy of Holies was desecrated, you would think that the boy and the girl would separate, would really look apart from each other in the strongest way possible. But instead what happened was they embraced. Because that was a tragedy of the highest magnitude and really trampled on their relationship in such a way for them to realize, for the Jewish people and God to realize, that in a sense, even though things are so bad, all they have left is each other. And this is something we all can relate to. And the young lad and the young woman, those statuettes, actually embraced one another. And this is something that the Romans looked at, the Romans who were the forebearers of the Christians, looked as pornographic. They went in the street with these statuettes mocking the Jews, saying, look what the Jews have in the holiest of holy places, they have pornography. Because they don't appreciate what it means to have this relationship between the Jewish people and God and how it compares to the physical universe. And the physical universe is not only not a contradiction to spirituality and to holiness, it is the only way we can attain and achieve and appreciate and understand holiness and relationship with God, that which is spiritual. And this is something that I think we are supposed to learn from Shir Hashirim, from what we read today, is that the relationship, if you want to relate to God, the relationship between God and Jewish people, and the relationship between every person, every Jew, and to God, you have to learn how to love in this world. You have to learn how to connect to others in a meaningful, serious way, and have a real relationship that is committed, that is loving, that is one that is full of passion and desire. And only then can in our attempts to attain this kind of relationship, even if we don't attain it, but to understand what it is in a physical way, that's the only way we could then turn to God and compare our relationship with God with something physical, and thereby relate to God directly. So, when I was in Israel, Rabbi Bina and Yeshiva Kotel used to tell us how lucky we were to be studying in yeshiva, for many reasons. But the one reason he always came back to was because we were fortunate enough to have learning in our yeshiva, in our Beit Midrash, Rabbi Victor Devensal, who was the chief rabbi of the old city, and it truly is he should live to be well, and he should have a refuah shlema, speedy recovery soon. But he's truly a person that has no equal. He's a person who is purely physical, at least as much as that is possible. Spiritual. Incredible level of spirituality. And you saw holiness radiate from his face. He's a person who wears tefillin all day long. He wears the boxes of tefillin on his head and his arm all day long during the week, because he constantly tries to connect to God in every moment of his life. And because so much emphasis was put on Rav Nevensal as a role model, we used to follow him around to just see what he did during certain times of the day. And we used to, I mentioned this before, we used to follow him as he went to, as everyone else left the study hall to go eat lunch. And therefore, there was basically no one left in the study hall except for him. And he would, by himself, when he knew he was by himself, we were spying on him, he didn't realize, but what he did was, he would walk to the back of the Beit Midrash, walk outside, and look out the window at the mosque on Har HaBayit, on the Mount of Olives, on the Temple Mount, and he would cry. Because he knew that this pained God, that the Jewish people were in exile, the Jewish people had a mosque on the holiest place on earth, and he was pained by this, because he knew God was pained by it. And he taught us how it looks and how it feels to be a person who's in love with God. And he used to tell us that if it's a very simple thing to love God. People ask him, he says all the time, how do you love God? I don't know who he is. He said, let's say you had somebody come to your house every day and place a gift at your front door. You don't know who the person is. But if every single day this happens, you could feel a sense of love for this person. He says that's the analogy you have to use with God. That God gives us so much every day, so many blessings. We have to appreciate the blessings we get from God. And if we focus on what God gives us, we're able to love Him. And if we understand this analogy, that life is an analogy, this concept, that the greatest pleasures in this world are the pleasures of love, and understand what the concepts mean and what it means to love someone in this world, we will be able to connect and love God, and thereby live a life that is filled with love. Chag Sameach and Shabbat Shalom.